For the style of this illustration, I feel like the texturing would work really well with the noise effect. I'm going to show you how I normally apply this, and I will use it in a couple of different ways throughout the illustration. First, I'm going to start with the waves or the water. I'm going to select that shape that I created in the background layer and then copy, paste it, Command or Control C, Command or Control F. So I'll just show you in the layers panel, there's our duplicate layer or duplicate object. And I can change the color of this to the darker blue color, like that. And then I will click on Make Mask in the transparency panel, turn off the clip, click on the mask icon, and then paste again at the same shape. So that's Command or Control F one more time. Now this shape should be set to black. So we can double click on the swatch and set it to black, so that's completely hidden. So whenever you use black in an opacity mask, it's going to hide your object. And of course you can change the size of this shape. It doesn't have to be exactly the same shape as the original one, but this is something that we can change later anytime. While this one is set up, I will actually switch to a gradient. So this object, instead of just being black, should be black and white gradient. So I will click on this option here. It's a linear gradient, and I'm going to use the gradient annotator by pressing G on the keyboard and drag this down. I actually want this to be starting on the top and then come down, maybe have a smaller transition, something like this. I can align it up here. If I hold down the Shift key, I can make sure that it's perfectly vertical. Okay, so we have a reveal effect essentially of this shape. It's showing only here on the top and it's all hidden down at the bottom. So from that black point down, it's completely hidden, and from here to here it's starting to show. So it's a very subtle gradient effect there. But here comes the interesting bit. We actually going to apply an effect on this mask. So the shape that we are using to mask this detail out, we will be using the effect menu, texture, grain option. And the settings that I like to use is the following. Here on the right, you can choose the stippled or stippled effect. And then the intensity, I like to keep fairly low, and the contrast on 0. If you increase the contrast, it's just going to make the spread or the transition between the black and white parts too abrupt. So contrast I like to keep on the lowest value, and intensity, like I said, I like to keep lower because it's going to create an interesting effect for us, you will see later on. So I will set this up to around 35, something like this, I think looks good. So let's click OK. And already you can see what we achieved. We have this cool pixelated texture effect that we have here on the top, but we also have some of these specks showing at the bottom. That's thanks to the lower intensity that we used. If I were to go back and select this shape and increase the intensity of the grain effect, which is available or accessible through the appearance panel. So by going back there, increasing the intensity, I would eliminate those specks and I would only have the effect up here. But I actually prefer it this way, so I'm going to have some of those details further down as well. Now the only issue with the grain effect is that it's a raster effect. And if you go to the effect menu under document raster effect settings, you might need to increase your resolution for it to show up like this. So if you have something different, let's just say you have something very low like 10 ppi, it's going to look extremely pixelated like that, which could actually be a cool effect if you want to go for that. But the higher you set your resolution, the more detailed it will become. I'm not going to go above 72 ppi. I think that's plenty for what I want to achieve. But you have to remember to always check this, especially if you resize or scale your illustration. You always have to adjust the document raster effect settings. However, there is a way to vectorize this, and I actually like to do that. So instead of keeping it like this, what we will do is to have this shape selected, so the one inside the mask, and I will go up to the object menu and choose Expand Appearance. So this is going to prevent me to be able to go back to adjust the green settings anymore, but this is the first step for vectorizing this effect. Next step is to click on image trace while this shape is still selected. So remember, we are still working on the mask. So image trace, and then click on the settings to be able to see the image trace and be able to refine the settings. So that's the icon you need to click on. And then here, first thing you have to make sure is the paths are set to 100%. The corners can be reduced to either minimal value or close to minimal. Let's just say what happens if we set it to 0%. It doesn't really make that much difference here. What's going to make a difference is once we start adjusting the noise. But first, make sure you turn on simplify as well. And also the ignore color should be on, and the snap curves to lines can be turned off. These are all ways of reducing the amount of anchor points and paths generated with image trace. And that is important because if you end up having too much, then it will be a very heavy Illustrator file and it will be hard to come back and make changes to it. So yeah, use these settings, and now we are ready to adjust the noise. So I'm going to first type in 5 pixels and let's see what happens. It's going to process this, and that already looks interesting. But let's see what happens if we go down a bit. I'm going to type in 4, and you have to be careful with this. The lower you go with the noise value, the more it's going to take for it to render. And I think the 3 point should be working well. Yeah, it's already rendering quite a lot. I can see it's 40,000 anchors that's been created, even with the simplify on. And what I like to do to test the vectorization is to use this little eye icon, hold it down to see the original pixels. And then when you let go, you can see the vectorized version. And we can see that this effect is applied here further down as well, thanks to the intensity or lower intensity that we used. And it looks quite nice here on the top as well. Let's just check it on the left side. Yeah, I like how this looks. So now we can expand this. So again, this is going to make this settings that we used here in the image trace panel finalized. By clicking on expand, it's going to actually turn into a vectorized object. You can close the image trace panel, and then now what we can do is to move this up and down just to see how it's affecting our illustration. I think it's in a good place already, but I can just drag this up a little bit more. Now, don't forget that this effect is applied to an object which can be changed in color. So I can click back on the object itself, exiting the opacity mask. And if I change this to a darker color, that's what's going to appear there, or any other color that I want to use. It could be used for highlights as well if I wanted to. But in this case, it makes sense to use this darker color, and it works quite well. So we can see which one we prefer. I think that is a good one for this. So that's the first detail that we created using this noise effect. But I would like to introduce this on a couple of additional details, like the sand. It would make sense to use it there as well. So I'm just going to select that, copy, paste it. And in this case, because I don't have this swatch set up, I'm just going to double click on the swatch and just make it a little bit darker, something like that. Maybe a bit more saturated as well. Maybe we can slightly drag it down on the hue wheel as well. Let's click OK. So this is again a duplicate object, just like before. We have this one, and below it we have the original color. So now, having this one selected, I can go into make mask and turn off the clip, select the mask and paste the shape in again, Command or Control F, and then apply the gradient on it, the linear gradient. And then we can just use the gradient tool and apply it again. So here I would like to have this effect appearing on the top like that. Maybe we can drag it up a bit, make the transition smaller like this. So first you have to judge your gradient without the effect, whether you like it or not. And I feel like it adds to the illustration, but I want to break this up instead of it being so smooth. That's why I'm using this grain effect. So while this mask is selected, I am going to go to the effect menu, and now we can just reapply the previously used settings. So apply grain, The good news, we don't have to do anything else here. Maybe we can just adjust the angle a little bit. I click and drag up here. And I want this to be quite subtle like this. And then we can go into Object menu, expand appearance, then image trace. And unfortunately, the image trace settings were not saved. That's something that you can save as a preset, so you can come here and save it. But for now, I'm just going to turn things on again. So ignore color, turn off the snap feature. I want to use simplify, path on maximum, corners on minimum, and then noise, I believe we used in the end 3 pixels. So let's see how that looks. Once I click in another section, it's going to generate it for us. Yeah, that looks good. I'm going to expand this, and then we can close this window, and we can just move this up a little bit. I think I only want to see it on the edge there. Now, another cool thing that you can do, of course, is that you can still move these points around. If you wanted the effect to follow this shape a bit better, you can just use tools like the warp tool. And I'm going to Alt or Option click and drag, make the brush size bigger, and then just drag these points down so you can move this down. And if you hide the edges, going to the view menu, you choose hide edges from here. I already used my keyboard shortcut F3 for this. Then you will be able to do this better. So it will disappear each time you are doing this. So that's better aligned to the edge. Maybe we can also drag it down a bit more here. And yeah, that's looking good. Now, if I want to change the color, I can always come back. If I feel like it's a bit too dark, we can refine it, make it more subtle, like that. So it's barely noticeable, but it's still there. It's a nice little detail.